It's December 11th, 2013, and we're at the Clinton County Government Center, but not just at the Government Center. We're at the Clinton County Historian's Office with the historian herself, Dr. Anastasia Pratt. Stacy, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. We haven't been at this table for a while.
That's true.
I want you to know that some of the most poignant moments of my life have been spent at this table.
Oh.
With you and your predecessors. I have picked up new ghost stories. I have had sterling conversations with people who just came in to ask for a map or talk about genealogy. So through the years, this office and now you sitting in that chair have made a real impact. Isn't it fun?
It's wonderful. It's great fun. It's great fun to have people come in and to see all of the different research questions they have, to try to dig up answers for them.
You know, I went online this morning. I always do a little bit of homework. And I just looked through the list of historians we have in Clinton County, and I'm so impressed that this county, and most others, but this county because we live and work here, really cares about its history. And we are so fortunate to have some great folks sitting in their little chairs in the towns of Clinton County.
We absolutely are. We have a really great group of dedicated historians, people who love history, like Bob Cheeseman in Shazy.
Well, he's the first one on my list, and that is not to discredit any of the other historians, but Bob Cheeseman and I have been friends for 50 years.
Yeah.
And he just, when I say salt of the earth, North Country people, but Bob is just one of those guys who loves, it has to be a passion.
Yeah, it does. He loves history. It shows from every conversation he has, every ounce of his being, I think. And he loves stories, which are my favorite part of history.
Oh, well,
so he gathers stories and shares them.
Yeah, stories are great. Yeah. And of course, Bob and I tell stories, and everybody else sits in the car and freezes to death. And Bob, we love that office up there in that wonderful historic building that he's located in.
He does have a beautiful office with a beautiful collection of materials to help people in their searches.
Calvin and I have been fortunate enough to sit there with his cameras and hometown cable. I will say, without fear of contradiction, numerous times, interviewing people who escaped from Europe in World War II, talking about history. I've been at Halloween parties. I feel good when I go up there because the whole William H. Minor thing is it's just terrific. The school, the churches, the Great Gables, the whole 9 yards in Shazy, not to mention the Alice Minor Museum, which is virtually across the road. So anyway, we do have a rich history here in the North Country, and we can start our program today by urging people to care about the history of their house, their family, their towns, and tragically, for me it's tragic, when people don't care about history, about their own family history. How many people have you met who don't know who their great-grandfather, great-grandparents were?
A lot. and it shows up here when people come for research, and it shows up in all those other historians' offices. I know because they call for help, and we help each other. But people call and they're like, I'm trying to do my family tree, but I only know my grandmother as Grandma.
Isn't it amazing?
I don't know what her name was because we just called her Grandma. And then even more with great-grandparents and beyond. And it's sad because we lose that direct lineage, but it's also sad because we lose the stories that go along with it, we lose the pictures that go along with it. And I try very hard everywhere I go to remind people that everything we have constitutes part of our history. And even if we don't find it valuable at this exact moment, somebody someday will.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is why when I go to historic events, if I'm not speaking, I have a camera out. Why I appreciate these shows, because there's so much of our local history that if we save it, will be a treasure for folks who come after us.
I don't mind tipping the Gordy Little hat and the Stacy Pratt hat to Kelvin Castine, the guy behind that camera,
Absolutely.
because he's been doing that. archiving the North Country's almost daily history since the early 1980s. And if people are not familiar with hometowncablenetwork.com, plattsburgh.com, or the local cable systems where these programs can be accessed, they should. Because there will be something. It's like having a plate with some things you love and some people don't like asparagus, but you can go to another event or another show or a kid's ball game or something. So that archive itself is really quite valuable.
Absolutely. Invaluable. Even.
Invaluable even.
Yeah. And I would say that I'm trying to showcase that. Calvin probably will laugh about this, but in all of those events I make sure I take a picture of him recording the rest of us, because he's always there safeguarding our history.
Isn't it? It's just wonderful. I want to talk about historians in general, and that's why we started the conversation that way. They do so much for each community in preserving that history, but in a historian's office, in this office and in all the other offices in our county, genealogy is an important factor. And I've said it on camera, and I'll repeat it. Many years ago, when I was a little boy, most historians would get the daily paper and get the clippings out of the paper, put it in a big scrapbook, and that was, in large measure, the extent of what they did. Now, the duties of an historian are so much broader, and that includes genealogy and lots of other things. And you, Stacy, and your mommy and other wonderful dear friends of mine have been attached to genealogy for a long time. Tell us about your role in genealogy on the grander scale.
Okay. Well, first I would say that when it comes to family tree inquiries and genealogy at large, my mom is the much better researcher than I am. She's been doing genealogy research since, I think, the early 90s, actually, maybe late 80s. And she is tied into the local community, and she's tied into the larger local community that includes Canada and Vermont, and really helps people enormously. Part of that work has happened through the Northern New York American Canadian Genealogical Society.
I knew we'd get to it, of which you are the president.
Well, outgoing. I'm the past president.
Oh, I thought you were still in this.
We just changed. We have term limits, which I think is a really good thing for any organization. And so my term expired, and Mike Burgess, who is one of the librarians at Special Collections, is now the president.
Yes. No kidding. That's great.
Yeah. So I'm still tied into it, and my mom is still a bit. Though less. She's retired officially and is just helping a little bit and not doing as much work for that group. But the group itself does a lot of work for the local community through sponsoring conferences that are open to the public, through visiting classrooms, opening up their library. Last summer we were really privileged to do that for a group of Upward Bound students who came to Dannemora, where our library is located, and researched their families. Some of them were very successful because they're long-standing local families, and we have a lot of research material for them. Others were less lucky because their families came from further afield, and we didn't have as much information. But in those instances, that network of historians helped a lot. There were folks, we sort of issued the email call for help and said, we have this student, she's looking for someone who came from here. Do you have any information or any contacts? And folks like Bob Cheeseman and Barb Banquet, who's the town of Schuyler Falls historian, and John Kruger, who's the city of Plattsburgh historian, answer those calls to the best of their ability. Sometimes we have different connections. Barb comes from the Rochester area, and I'm pretty sure that one of these students came from that area, and she was able to help us direct him to a source of information, which I think is one of the beauties of our local history community, that folks help each other in a pretty big way, all with the goal of helping excite others about history and helping them find the answers they want. So, whether it's CCHA with Melissa Peck or Julie Dowd or Helen Nurska giving answers to help, or it's the Underground Railroad History Association with the Papsons offering assistance, or the Genealogy Society, or Celine Paquette at the Samuel de Champlain Center. So we all try to work together to help inspire folks to keep looking for history.
Calvin and I are fortunate to have been invited into that wonderful collection of historians and genealogists, and I should mention that You can move, but you can't hide. We found that genealogical organization many years ago and have traced it to its new home at the old school in Emmons Street in Dannemora. I love that building. I go in there often to appear to the senior citizens and talk about the museum with Pete Light and other people. And now the Genealogical Society is located there. And I don't mind telling you, I spend a lot of time promoting that group. Because until you get involved in one of these searches, you don't know. But when you said that people, historians and genealogists, are magnanimous in sharing their time and effort on behalf of people they've never met before, I can personally attest to that. Looking for my family history from the Rochester area, Barb and I talk often. But people I've never met said, yeah, we'll go to the cemetery. We'll do a rubbing on that gravestone for you. Yeah, we'll go to City Hall and see what we... People in Florida say, yeah, I've got 60 pages on your family. Do you want them? Zip, you got them. So that's nice.
It is
So
nice.
we're warm and fuzzy, you know.
Which is good. I mean, I think one way to get people excited about history is to help them find answers. If you never find answers to the questions you're asking, it's easy to get discouraged and to turn away, to check a different pursuit where you can find answers. And so I think that network of helpers makes it easier to continue to be interested. Also, I just think it's, I don't know, as a person, I think it's the right thing,
Yeah.
the way to be.
Calvin cares that way, and he's instilled that in me, and I had that feeling when I first came here. I was hungry for the history of this area when I moved here in 1961. The first thing I did was take a metal detector and walk in the woods and look for Pike's Cantonment. that great mystery way back in the early 1960s. And I refer people to hometowncablenetwork.com and the other ways to access this program. Often somebody will say, you know, have you ever heard of? And I'll say, yeah, Calvin and I did a program there in 1999. Just go on, hometown.
Right.
So anyway, this was your destiny. For those people who didn't see our other interviews with Stacy or her wonderful mom in the past, I don't know how many people believe that your destiny is outlined for you, but it seems to me from the time you were a little girl, you were destined to play the double bass
Indeed.
and to call your bass baby. You still have that bass.
I do. I play it regularly.
I cannot, it's a 3/4 bass.
It is a 3/4 size because I'm kind of small for a bass player. I'm kind of short and I have kind of small hands, so a full size would not work very well for me.
It's amazing. Of course, I've read all your comments and your personal history of baby and how you first got it and how you were encouraged and nurtured by your parents. And that's something else that Calvin and I talk about all the time. When you have little children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, as I do, you know, sit them on your lap and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Let them go down that road less traveled. Buy him a double bass and let him go to school because there were no violins left for you, right? When you started.
That's right. That's exactly it. And I have to say about that, I have been incredibly blessed. My parents are wonderful people, and they have been ever so supportive of me and my sister, letting us follow our dreams always, which is an amazing gift that parents can give.
Sometimes those dreams are so far off the main road. That was the case of my parents, and my father would just shake his head and say, okay, just tell me if you had a good time. So yes, not only that, your father was able to repair your poor broken baby each time it fell and smashed.
He has been, which is good. It did have, if you ever see me playing, you can see this battle scars, as we call them. Just weird things that happened, and because my dad and his family were in construction, he was able to figure out ways to fix it when, at the time, the local, or, and I do mean larger local, violin repair shops didn't want to touch it. They didn't think that there was a good way to repair it, and so they wouldn't do it. And my dad each time has figured out a way. One time it was a joint effort. My dad and his brother actually repaired it. So when I look at that bass, it brings me back to history always as I'm hugging it to play it. You know, there's that family history that sort of seeped into every pore of my bass.
It's wonderful. I'm so glad you stuck with the bass. I mean,
Yeah.
you took a little hiatus every now and again along the way, but Stacy, I might tell for the benefit of our viewers who like anecdotes, is probably the only double bass player on the planet who at least part of the time had to tune her bass with a pair of vice grips.
Yes.
Not anymore, though, right?
No, no. One of the breaks along the way was the tuning peg for my D string, the little knob that you
Yeah.
pull, broke off. And it was one of those repairs that the violin shops didn't want to do. There are a couple of ways you can get tuning pegs, and one is to have a single unit on each side of the bass, and the other is to have 4 separate tuning pegs. My bass is just old enough that it has the single unit, and so the only way to repair it would be to actually take both plates off and get new plates to put on, which has some downsides because how well they'll fit on that scroll is questionable, or to weld on the piece. And there was nobody who was willing to touch that piece with a welder. So I used vice grips for a long time. And
I think it's funny. I think it's
was.
beautiful.
It was a good fix to a problem. We got in tune, so that was the most important thing.
It's hard enough to keep a bass in tune anyway,
It
in
is.
optimum conditions, right?
It is. So, we have a different solution now. And now, as technology has improved, we have also the possibility of a little tack welder that will,
Oh, you do?
will attach the tuning peg.
But you and I have made, and Calvin have made so many friends in the North Country, and the virtue of having many friends and knowing what they do or what they're passionate about is that you can refer people.
Yes.
And I have to mention only 1 or 2 names in connection with your multifarious career. And one of them is Nelson Bosworth, because as you know, I worked with his dad on the radio for many decades. And Nelson is an icon when it comes to music and touching young lives with music.
Absolutely.
And I know he's been an influence for you, too.
He kind of revolutionized my music life.
Yeah.
I went to Peru, so I wasn't at school with Mr. Bosworth. And I know I should call him Nelson, but I just can't. It's a sign of great respect, I guess. I met him as Mr. Bosworth. But and he taught at Northeastern Clinton. But I played in the Adirondack Youth Orchestra with his daughter, Sarah.
Of course.
And so one day I got a phone call from Mr. Bosworth, and I can't remember, honestly, if it was 7th grade or 8th grade. I think it was probably 7th grade because that's when I started with the youth orchestra. And he said, "We're doing this musical. Do you want to come and play?" I said, "Okay." So my parents, God love them, drove me to Champlain. I don't know how many times for rehearsals and for the shows. And I played in my first musical, The Sound of Music, and found out quickly that I loved it. It is absolutely
Very much in the news lately again.
Yes, right. As it turns out, that's my favorite kind of playing. It's sort of, the bass is an important role, but it's not the starlight role, which I enjoy, and you get to be part of live theater. But then it also ties you into that community. So, that was when I was in 7th grade, and I'm certainly not anywhere close to 7th grade now. I played in every musical until I graduated from college, and then I went away, and then I came back, and I was fortunate enough to be invited by Mr. Bosworth again to play in the Shazy Music Theater, which then ties me into that community. And it also brings it back to history, because I have to say that there are a couple of folks in the Shazy Music Theater group who actually helped me with this book, who answered questions.
No kidding.
One of them is Mr. Bosworth, and the other is Jason Borey, who very often directs.
Oh my goodness! I guess he does.
So it's funny how that happens, that, from one phone call when I was in 7th grade, I got connected into a world that I would not have known without that invitation. Got tied into a different part of the county, a different school system, got to know folks from a different place, and over the years was able to use that to develop friendships and to develop the system of resources where I could say, hey, I have a question about Rouse's Point. Let's ask someone who's from there.
Yeah, got a question about Champlain, ask Calvin.
Yes.
He's been into North Country history for a long time, and we enjoy talking about it. You also teach at the college.
I do. I teach at Empire State College, which is a distance learning institution within the SUNY system. And my office is on Plattsburgh State's campus. So I kind of get to enjoy the best of both worlds. I get to be part of Plattsburgh State's world, which is nice because I graduated from Plattsburgh State. And I also get to be part of this larger New York statewide college.
I don't know how many other things you do, but the resume is several pages long. I hope we've whetted people's appetites. We sat here when you wrote your first book, which was called
Clinton County. It was part of Arcadia's Image of America series.
And this is still Arcadia, right?
It is.
The next book will be called
Clinton County.
Of course.
But it's
Just
part
couldn't
of.
come up with another title, could you, Steve?
No, I guess I'm not creative.
Yes, you are.
But this one is part of the Postcard History series.
Now, I should say we would normally be able to hold the book up and show people.
And I wish very
Except
much I
for
could
one
let you do
thing,
that.
the book won't be out until February of 2014.
Yes.
But we are so lucky we're in the historian's office.
Yes.
So we have postcards and postcards and postcards. Every now and again, Calvin and I have many friends who love to put postcard pictures on Facebook. And they always say, who was this? Where was this? And they test our recollection. Of course, I can't remember whether I have socks on both feet because I'm at that stage in my life. But Calvin has a wonderful memory for his childhood and the things he's seen, and so he knows all the old hotels. Not that he would remember any of the old bars, but I remember a few from my early days here in the North Country. But we do have a rich history, and postcards carry a lot of that history with them, don't they?
They do. They very much do. I was really fascinated. We have a lot of postcards in the historian's office, and I was lucky to have generous folks around who are willing to share postcards, including some of the historians we've discussed. But looking at each one and then digging behind it to find a story to go with it was really kind of fascinating. One man, Gary Wells, who used to work at the County Government Center,
Absolutely.
brought in a bunch of postcards for me. And there was one book that I loved. It was just amazing. It was a promotional booklet for the Witherell Hotel.
Oh, come on.
And I wish I had that to show you.
Oh, wow.
But it was one of those postcard booklets that you can buy where there were 10 images and
Oh,
each one
sure.
had a story. But one of the most amazing things about it is one of the postcard images was the staff of the Witherell Hotel. I thought, how cool is that? Often those are the folks who are behind the scenes. You never see them. But here's this postcard. There are downsides to it as well. There's this beautiful postcard. It is in the book. I kind of fought for that one. The image quality is not maybe as good as some of the others, but here's this group of people who worked at the Witherell Hotel. None of them is named.
Oh, no. Well, there are people who are extant as we're doing this program who could name all those people for you.
Well, I would love for them to call me or come in and visit.
I wish I'd known you were going through that process, because every now and again somebody will tell me, I was a bartender there, I ran the elevator there, or my mother was a waitress there, So there are people still alive, as older than I am, who remember the Witherell and the other hotels in town very, very well. So that information, and people are probably watching this
Yes.
very program who will call Stacy Pratt at the Clinton County Historian's Office and say, what do you want to know? I mean, every time when Dr. Richard Frost wrote his book, he had, like you, stacks and stacks of photographs. Gordy, I don't know, who are these people? So we'd sit at my dining room table and we'd identify a few, and he'd sit at another dining room table until he finally got them identified. That's another point we can make at this stage in our interview. If people have old photographs, please write somewhere, either on the back of it or in a list on your computer, the names of the people on those photographs.
Absolutely.
If you have an old church or an old house, where is the church? Where is the house? So future generations, like Stacy doing another book on Clinton County, can know. Tell us a little bit about why you're doing Clinton County for this particular group, for this publisher.
Sure. Well, Arcadia does these two series, Images of America and Postcard History series. They have others as well, focused on people and organizations. But as a publishing company, their mission is to celebrate local history.
Yeah.
And so the editor, Rebecca Collingsworth, approached me and said, we'd really like to do another book from your area. people in your county seem to really like local history. It seems like there are more things to do, and are you interested? And so I said, of course, because it's a lot of fun. But this time, it was my choice to do the postcard history series as opposed to something else. And really, a lot of the reason that I wanted to do that is we have hundreds of postcards that nobody ever sees. People come into this office, and most of the time they want help with genealogy. And sometimes that involves finding a postcard image that I can pull out and say, okay, here, look at this. Sometimes, more often, it doesn't. More often it involves finding family folders with information about a particular name, or pulling genealogy books off from the shelf, or connecting them with another historian who might be from the same family. It sometimes brings us into the photograph files where we happen to have an image of somebody who probably is connected. Sometimes they're identified, sometimes not. But we don't get to see the postcards very often. And the postcards are really interesting, I think. There are some that are just, you look at it, and I look at them and I laugh. I think, what was this? Who thought this was a good idea? But then with a little bit of research, it's like, I get it. This makes sense. It's not so out there. It's not so
Postcards have been made in the world for a long time. I once did an extensive investigation research into the history of postcards and how they've changed, and how the mailing process changed, and when you could actually write on that side of the postcard in the past. And I have, I won't say an extensive collection, but a large collection of my own, because I'm interested in history. And like you said, there are many people watching this program who in a dresser drawer have hundreds of old postcards. In my case, I have portfolios of postcards that my parents collected 100 years ago in Rochester, and in places that may be or may not be familiar to people here in the North Country. So you wouldn't mind them breaking some of those postcards loose and showing up to you?
I would love for people to show postcards or photographs. And first, I find them personally fascinating, so you can be sure of a welcome reception.
The messages, the postmarks, the dates.
All of it. Every part of it I find fascinating. And if people bring them in, I'm always willing to also to scan them, to digitize them, and then give the people a copy of the digitized files as well, which can be nice to share with family. If you have 6 kids and you don't know who gets the postcards because everyone wants the images, I can help with that. But it's also good, and that was another benefit of this project, it let me be sure that every part of our collection was fully digitized, so that every postcard we have in this office now has a digital file, and every photograph.
It's marvelous.
And I have to say about that, just to be fair, that I had some help from my friends in that regard, too.
Oh, we all need a little help from our friends.
Certainly my mom helped. My sister helped me digitize some files that had to be returned really quickly. But also Tim Kluge, a professor at Plattsburgh State, digitized a lot of postcards from this collection, which was really very kind of him.
Yeah, there's a nice kindness. I call it love, but there is a nice kindness and love in the North Country and wanting to share things with each other. These books about history are available. They're almost ubiquitous when you walk into a drugstore. What's the first book on the shelf from this collection?
Absolutely.
All over the country, and your books are no exception. The first one was received very well. What is that? How many years ago?
That was 2 years ago, I believe.
At least 2 years ago.
At least 2, possibly 3. I do too. I'm not entirely sure.
So tell us about the efforts you did in getting this book together. When did it start, and when did it finish?
It started, I guess, with an email that I received probably either last April or last May, saying, "Are you interested?" And I said, "Sure."
This year or 2012?
No, 2013.
This year?
This year, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And then so what happens is you do write an official proposal, and that involves many pages of forms and answering questions.
You're used to that.
I am, and that's fine. But as part of that process, the author proposes a timeline to follow for the rest of it. So if this happened quickly, it's my own fault. So know that ahead of time. It wasn't a publisher forcing me. So what I said to the company is, yes, I would love to do this. I'd love to do a postcard book, My basic idea, the premise of the book, is that we're taking a driving tour of the county. That's the basic
love it.
organizational structure.
What a great idea.
And we weave back and forth because it's not easy to do a single route and catch all of the inner parts of the county. But that's the basic idea. So I said, that's what I want to do. And I have about this many postcards. I was really lucky because most of them had already been digitized. There were only others that came later that I had to do that scanning process for. And by the way, I want to finish it this summer. We have a break from the college for reading period when I don't have obligations to meet with students. And that's sort of the ideal time for me to work on some kind of project like this. So that's what I said, and as a result, I finished it. I posted the ecstatic Facebook posts about being done, I think at the very beginning of August. So the text has been done since then.
It's ambitious and incredible. And notwithstanding the fact that you have about 84,000 other irons in the fire, Stacy,
Yeah.
I don't know how you did it,
Well,
but you did.
I did, and I enjoyed it.
But it's not just putting postcards in a book. You ought to write things.
I did have to write things. I had to write captions, which involved some research, a lot of research, if I'm being fair. But I really find that exciting and invigorating. So that was fun. You know, it's, I guess, the standard labor of love.
Have any of the other books from other areas involved postcards?
Yes.
They have. So this has been done.
It's been done, although this is a newer series for Arcadia, so it's not as long-standing. I don't know exactly how old it is, but my guess is that the postcard histories have only been done for maybe 2 or 3 years.
Give me an idea how many of these books are sold. Do you have any clue? How many did your last book sell? I know it's still selling.
It is still selling. I don't have exact numbers, but at this point it probably... It's in the thousands.
Is it really?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Well, now that you've made yourself doubly famous with that book, this one will do the same. Again, I should tell people that we can show a picture of what it's going to look like, but we can't show the cover of the book because it hasn't even been printed yet. But do they assure you it'll be sometime in February?
February 3rd is the date. I've received the proofs back. I've made the corrections of little typos here and there.
There are always typos.
There are always typos, and I'm sure that someone will find one as soon as they get a copy.
Do you
just
read?
because-
I know you're an English teacher, and you and me and Garrison Keeler love English majors. But when you read a book, whether you're really into the book or not, do you always find the typos?
I do.
Find the pages that are still stuck together that haven't been cut. And I do that, and I don't know why. It's not that I'm being critical. It's just that I'm saying, whoa, look at this. Whoa, look at this.
I do, and I always think, because everything for me is somehow connected to history, I think of my great aunt. I was very blessed to grow up with a series of great aunts around and a great uncle when my grandparents had already passed away. And one of these great aunts was a professor of French who was very exacting.
Mm-hmm.
She used to find those, and she used to circle them and make note of them and send them back to the publisher.
Oh, no, really? Oh, I don't think I've ever done that.
I've not done that either, but I think of her because I do notice, and so I hope very much that I caught all of them.
That's cute. When I was on the radio, when I first started on the radio here, now that in retrospect, it was probably a compliment that all these English teachers and former English teachers and authors and writers would send me a little note saying, Gordy, you're using that word wrong. And I said, well, if we all live long enough, the way I use it will be common, so and you know what, that happens. And that's sad because we've done nasty things to the English language. I was talking to another young woman who's just going to start her master's degree in English. We were talking about Middle English and the beautiful rhythm and music of the language back in those days and what we've done to it by common usage. So every time I hear the words may and might on television, they're interchangeable these days. And boy, when I was in grade school, you'd get your knuckles slapped for using. So anyway, that's where we are. How many postcards in the book?
There are just under 200 postcards.
Come on.
And I can't tell you the exact number because some of them got pulled out of the original text because the quality wasn't high enough. But it's just under 200.
Do you know what I've discovered? Calvin and I have done numerous programs with people who use old photographs, old newspaper clippings, and so on in their books. And I find that people are very tolerant of fuzzy old photographs. You don't have to use Photoshop or any other device to clear some of them up because they are such an important part of history. We're lucky that photography has been around since the third decade of the 19th century and that we have great old photographs. But some of these postcards, the pictures weren't perfectly clear when they were initially taken. And that's true some of the pictures I take today. So I'm sure that people will enjoy looking at them regardless of how clear the picture is.
I think so. And I think for the most part they're very high quality pictures. I was disappointed by a couple of the rejections from the publisher, only because the postcards were fairly rare. So one that didn't make it into the book that I really wanted to was a picture of the 1907 Redford picnic.
Oh, come on.
And I argued, we tried. We went through two
you're
different...
killing me here.
I know, right? Two different phases. I submitted all of the images, the digitized images. The publisher, or the editor looked at them, and he approved them, and he questioned some, and I proposed replacements for some. And at that time, I said, please, 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 we need to publish one of these of the Redford picnic, because the 15th of Redford is still happening.
It's iconic. It's one of the
it's
oldest. The merry-go-round, the people.
Major event locally, and this is a rare image. This is the best of the ones that I have, but this is really important.
Didn't even know that picture existed.
And he said, okay, well, we'll pass it through. And then it got to the production crew, and they said, no, it's just not going to work. When it printed, apparently it had wavy lines in it, and so they said it just won't work.
Well, yeah, that's too bad. You know what? This is a whole other dimension to publishing books. We have to deal with the publishers and the editors, and if you're lucky enough to get involved in a larger scale, you have readers
Yes.
whom you've never met, who know nothing about who you are, your quirks, and your... So anyway, here we are. The book will be published. Will it be longer than the other one?
No, they have a set size, so it's 128 pages.
Oh, they do have a set size.
They do have a set size.
Somebody in their infinite wisdom decided 128 pages.
I guess so.
Isn't that amazing how that works?
It is, and then there are also numbers that you have to have for captions in the introduction. So the basic setup for me is there's a 2-page introduction that explains what's going to happen in the rest of the book, and mentions all of those wonderful historical groups and historians who help our region and who have helped me enormously. And then each chapter takes a look at a different part of our county's history. The captions within that are shorter or longer, depending on how many pictures are on the page. And so, like in the case of the Redford picnic, I couldn't get the image, but I certainly could, in the caption for the Assumption of Mary Church, spend a great deal of time talking about the 15th of Redford and mentioning the carousel and talking about that part of our history.
How much influence do you have as to the type size and font and...
No, absolutely none.
Nothing.
No.
They do what they want to do, don't they?
The layout of the pictures I do have control over. I proposed where pictures should go, so the order of the images is mine, and the number of pages in each chapter
We want to know who
is
to blame
mine.
if it screws up. No, it won't.
I guess, blame me.
Historians are the most fickle people when it comes to accuracy, with great reason, because they're historians. And so it's doubly troubling for you if something gets in that book and it's 1907 instead of 1904. You will live in misery.
I will. And I have to tell you, the first book, it happened that way.
Did it really?
Oh my gosh. We got the proofs, not the proof set of books, but the first set of books leading into publication. This box shows up, and it's an exciting moment when a box shows up.
Oh, yes. How well I know.
5 brand new copies of my book, and I pulled it out, and I handed one to each of my parents. And my dad opened it to the section that had planes and said, "That's not a KC-37."
Oh, no, he did not say that.
No.
He didn't. Oh.
Oh, no. And I hadn't showed it to him because I wanted it to be a surprise. So we dug through and we found out that the picture I'd used was mislabeled. I have no idea what a KC-137 looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, I do now, but I didn't then. So I learned something from that because it was miserable to see that mistake. Or there was another mistake about an anchor, and it was I incorrectly identified the ceremony it
really?
went to, which I immediately called the publisher, and they were supposed to have corrected those for subsequent editions of the book. But this time I learned from that, so every picture of a plane I made my dad look at before we went on, but also made sure that I asked lots of questions so I wouldn't say something incorrect. So hopefully I don't have to cringe in horror at those
Unlike
mistakes.
Gordy Little, you just blurt. Well, I would just blurt things out. You're more careful. Let's open the box. This is
Yeah.
not Pandora's, by the way.
Here,
This is not Pandora's box. You just grab whatever you want to. We'll hold it up to the camera, and you
Okay.
tell me about it. Where do you want
Well,
to begin?
we can just actually start with
You got them
that.
all stacked.
This is a postcard from the 350th anniversary of Champlain's arrival. And since we have not too distantly come off from the 400th anniversary, it's interesting to see that. It's Champlain's astrolabe, one of his navigational tools. And Champlain, of course, figures pretty heavily in this book, as in the first book, because so much of our county's past hinges on his explorations of this area.
And we just, not too long ago, as time flies by us, we celebrated the quadricentennial.
We did.
And that's wonderful. Next.
It doesn't matter. Grab whatever one you
Oh,
want, and we'll
really?
talk about it. Sure.
Okay, here's another.
And this one is from Schuyler Falls, actually. And I'm looking at the back because I want to get it right. But it's on the Salmon River, and it shows a cheese factory and also a starch factory. Our county's rivers have long made us a strong industrial presence. That water power has generated all kinds of factories. Schuyler Falls was heavily influenced by that, as was Keysville.
There are factories right up the road from me in Morrisonville that are long gone. The street isn't even the same as it was 100 years ago. So, I love to touch these old photographs.
I know.
If you don't mind.
I
This
don't
is
mind at all.
It's a tactile thing with me.
It is, and this type of postcard, we had a series of them. They're a thicker postcard and more fiber-based, so when you feel them, it really is not the same thing as walking into, say, a hotel and getting one of the really inexpensive postcards, or even walking in and finding a really glossy postcard. This is the city of Plattsburgh. We're actually in or near Trinity Park in that picture. So there's the old post office, there's the Presbyterian Church, and it's a street scene that could be anywhere in the world and yet is very specifically here.
City Hall Place was far different back in the day.
It was.
No, it's the color of postcard. Are any of the pictures color in the book?
They're not, unfortunately. All black and white.
Not my fault. I should tell people who are unfamiliar with the publishing business, even with a large group like this publishing books, it costs a huge amount more money to publish color pictures.
It does.
I can attest to that, having done 3 books now, some in color and some not. It costs a lot more when you put color in them. I know what this is. Oh, this is beautiful. Tell me about it.
It is. I love this one. First, you'll notice there are 2 images side by side. It's a stereoscope, so if you viewed it through a viewer, you would get almost a 3D image. And this was a mural that was in the original Hawkins Hall, which was called the Normal School at the time. Unfortunately, it was lost in the fire of 1929, but that was in the building, and it was a gift of, I believe, the class of 1925 to the Normal School, with each image celebrating a different part of normal school life.
You know, and there aren't very many people my age, and some even a little bit younger, and a few a little bit older, who don't remember, first of all, these images as a child. Even if you went to your grandmother's house and she had the viewer, and you put the card in and back and forth. It's a huge part of my own childhood. Calvin and I have done We did one good program at least 15 years ago, I think, on some of the wonderful images, Stoddard's images and others from the North Country. So this process is a huge part of our North Country history, and this picture
Oh, I love this picture.
from the old normal school, my goodness,
I do.
I've never seen it before. I will put it in my shirt. Oh, that's just absolutely beautiful. All right, I'm just taking them right off the top.
Sure.
Tell me what we've got.
This one, I believe, is the Minor Institute. Yep, it's the Minor Institute in Shazy. I think that the image is from the early 1970s, and it's an aerial view. You mentioned the miners before. Certainly, a huge amount of our local history was influenced by William Miner and his wife Alice. Not only did they build many of the buildings that are still in Shazy that are used for much of everyday life in Shazy, but they also developed these foundations and institutes. So the Miner Institute now is attached to SUNY Plattsburgh. It involves training of students, but it also does some pretty important scientific research. It's connected to Heart's Delight Farm, which also does more agricultural type research. It's loosely connected because of that Miner name to the Champlain Valley Physicians Hospital,
Oh, of course.
part of which was directly funded by William Miner. And to the Alice T. Miner Collection, the museum in Shazy that really showcases the history of this region, but also the history of the greater United States.
The miners, of course, part of the fabric of the North Country in ways that Calvin and I have chronicled on this program and other people have talked about for years and years, and we owe so much to them. Is this the same photograph?
It's either the same or just slightly different, but I think it's the same.
Just about, only slightly different.
I think it's
Okay.
like a centimeter of movement.
I think there was. Somebody twitched and there it was. Oh, look at this.
Yeah.
We were just talking about Mr. Miner,
We
weren't we?
were. So this was the original Shazy Central Rural School that the miners built. There are lots of interesting stories about the building and also its connections to Grey Gables across the street. We do have a postcard of Great Gables in the book, although I don't think it's here because it was a digitized
It's
image.
a shadow of its former self. It makes me sad to drive by now knowing what it was in its glory, knowing what this school was. And we've done numerous
Oh.
programs.
I
This was
always-
an iconic school. I mean, when he built Physicians Hospital, when he built Shazy Central Rural School, he didn't spare the horses.
No.
This school had things that some schools didn't have till the 1990s.
I was amazed looking through booklets. First, I'm also always saddened that the original building is not still there.
Yeah.
I don't know what caused it to be torn down, and maybe there were very good reasons, but it makes me sad because this looks like such a gorgeous building. But inside, they had, in the 1920s, they had separate gymnasiums for boys and girls.
Yeah.
They had swimming pools.
Yeah.
One for boys, one for girls. They had an orchestra and an orchestra room, plus a band and a chorus. They had the horse-drawn buses to take kids to school and to bring them home. And it really is amazing. At a time when other folks are still worrying about walking several miles to the one-room schoolhouse on Route 9 near the South Junction Road, kids in the Shazy area were being taken to and from school on these buses at a state-of-the-art school that taught them anything they could want to know, industrial arts and drafting. A boy could go to school and learn to be a drafter. Girls could go to school and not only take home economics courses, but they could also learn about music and art and literature and math and science. They weren't pigeonholed only into a track that would say, okay, the only thing you're going to do now is go and be a housewife. That's remarkable.
Everything you say triggers a memory for me, but that's the way history works. Calvin and I had the great fortune of being invited to Pine Harbor Assisted Living only about a week ago now, and interviewed a woman named Beulah Lavarnway, who is celebrating her 105th
Oh my gosh.
birthday just after Christmas, and she told us about going to Shazy Central
Oh, isn't that amazing?
School back in the day, right? And this woman was wonderful. Her daughter wasn't sure how fluent she would be when we were there. Guess what? Wow. Calvin had that up on Facebook within 5 hours of the time he got home, and it was delightful. Well, here's another view of it.
Yeah.
we show this. It's just an important part of North Country history, and like you, I wish I could have gone inside that building when I first came here.
Absolutely.
Just absolutely fine. Okay. And this is
This should be the Minor Institute
another
again.
one of Miners.
I guess it's not surprising that the stacks are
We all
really
have our
slightly
own
similar.
personal anecdotes about miners. When I first came here and my kids were very young, we'd always drive up to.
Just reach around, so it's probably all in different groups.
This one is different, but yeah, we'll flip around. This
So
one
we
is
would drive up to
fun.
Miners to finish my thought,
Mhm.
to look at the buffalo, the bison, if you will. We got some that are stuck together.
Oh,
Okay, what's this?
So this is one that I find particularly amusing because for years I've looked at this and said, why on earth do we have this postcard with this funny little rhyme and this random guy pushing a little wheelbarrow? So I did some research, and it turns out that this random little guy actually ran this station, which is now at Dannemora Crossing. At the time it was called, I think, Sheldon's, it's Sheldon Station in West Chazy, but not West Chazy as we know it. It's before the redistricting. Now it's more Altona. It turns out that he ran this train station, and so it was named for him, but it was the train station where all of the goods from Dannemora Prison would be unloaded from the trains for distribution and sale, and the place where all of the provisions for Dannemora Prison would be loaded onto the train to be taken to the prison. So this postcard that seemed totally random with a silly little rhyme on the side actually is a pretty important part of our local history. This was the guy who established the train station and ran it
Isn't that amazing?
to transport goods to and from what we now call Clinton Correctional Facility.
I think you ought to do a book on the railroad stations and the.
Well, and that would be amazing. We have a lot of images
my
of those
goodness.
and even more amazing stories, I think.
Oh yeah. I'm going to grab one of these theories. I've seen these before, but most of our viewers probably have not. We're talking about Alice T. Minor
Yes.
collection.
These postcards were published in series. There were a series of Alice T. Minor postcards, but there are similar postcards that are of the Kenta Lord House, and they also were published by the Alice T. Minor Museum in a
Just-
strange twist of fate.
Just amazing and wonderful.
And this is Keysville, the Arch
Boy,
Bridge in
there's
Keysville.
a world famous bridge for many reasons.
Absolutely it is. And another of those spots where the river really heavily influenced the life of the village and the town because it really fueled industry in Keysville.
We're fortunate to have done several television shows down there concerning the history and talked about this Keystone Arch Bridge, the longest of its kind in the world. I love it. Are we
Which
having
is
fun yet?
amazing, isn't it? Isn't
Oh,
it amazing
yeah.
that this little village that actually isn't even a village anymore has that distinction?
Now, when we were talking with Beulah the other day, didn't she mention Champlain College?
Mhm.
Did she teach there or go attend there? I can't remember.
Cooked.
She cooked. She was a
Yes.
wonderful cook, obviously. She grew up as part of a family of 10 children,
Oh,
5
gosh.
boys and 5 girls. She did a lot of cooking. This woman ended up to be a world traveler. She ran her own restaurant downtown, and that is Cumberland Hall, Champlain College. I have no idea when it was taken, but I would guess.
Those
Uh.
postcards are tricky, I have to say. It would have been published certainly before 1954,
Oh,
because
these are-
1954 is when the groundbreaking for Plattsburgh
yeah,
Air Force
these
Base
are
happened.
1930s.
But the images on the postcard were used for every iteration of
Oh,
the
really?
base that happened before.
Oh, there you go.
So the images are rough to date because they were published with just a different heading at the
And
bottom.
if you don't know about iterations, you will before we're.
Well,
I see what you
something
mean.
that's interesting about the base is that, there are postcard images published from the barracks when it was the
Yeah.
earliest barracks. There are postcards published from its time as an Army training camp with the Plattsburgh idea. Some are from a naval training center, and some are from Champlain College, and then they become Plattsburgh Air Force Base. They're all the same buildings, but they just were repurposed over time.
I've never seen this image before. I know the story, of course.
Sure.
But look at this.
Yeah. Plattsburgh High School.
Now, this is the Plattsburgh High School. that was on Oak Street.
On Oak Street, where the public library is.
As a matter of fact, deep within the bowels of the Plattsburgh Public Library are parts of this school.
Absolutely. And actually, if you stand far enough back, far enough away from the library, you can
see
see
it.
some of the
Oh,
roof
yes.
line in the background.
Who among us who are interested hasn't done that?
I did it just this weekend. My dad and I were looking at it.
Many, many years ago, a group of people found the bell from the old school in a hallway inside the library. Nobody knew what it was. It was inscribed with all the original board members.
Oh, gosh.
The Stafford Middle School people got together, moved it over there in great ceremony, and now have it ensconced in the Stafford Middle School for people who are interested. That's the history of it. Now, then of course the high school moved over to where the Stafford Middle School is now. Our late son Gary Baker was in the last graduating class
Oh, wow.
before they moved to Ruger Street. So we have connections.
Nice.
We all have. Hopefully we'll have many iterations ourselves. Who knows? Well, here's another one from Champlain College. That's the gymnasium, and that's very familiar.
I was going to say that's a ghost story place. Every year at Halloween, we get inquiries about ghost stories and whether there are ghosts in the gymnasium or if there are not ghosts. And I'll leave that to Gordy to
It's a
to
neat
answer.
place, and I've written and talked a lot about it, and we had a paranormal fair there one year, which was an awful lot of fun. So, oh yes, Plattsburgh's busiest corner, Stace.
Yeah, so Margaret Street, actually just across this, just a kind of kitty corner from where we are now. There are lots of interesting things about this that I didn't know until I started researching. One of those things is that there's a building here that's a store, and when I was growing up, it was the home of Zachary's Pizza, which was, I thought like the best pizza
You're
place
so young,
ever.
Stacy.
But what I learned about it after, since then it's been furniture store and I don't know what else, I guess just furniture store. But that actually was a pretty busy doctor's office for many years of its life. And not
yes.
just any doctor's office, it was actually William Beaumont's office.
And the plaque is still on the wall.
William Beaumont, of course, being the guy who really wrote the earliest textbooks on the stomach and gastric system of the human body, and he was local.
Google him and you'll find out things about why he left that hole in that poor man's stomach for all those years. That's interesting. And this is something else Calvin and I have talked about. As a matter of fact, we discussed it with Beulah, who's 105, and how busy downtowns were all over the country back in the day before
Oh my gosh.
before the malls. Every Saturday night, wall-to-wall people saying hello to each other, farmers talking about what crops made it and what crops didn't.
I know. Well, I was shocked by some of the statistics, some of them not so much, but on the cover of the book, there's a picture of the bridge over Bridge Street in Plattsburgh. And we had a bunch of images of that bridge, but when I looked up the news report, it's not going to work. I can show you this one. It's this bridge. When I looked up the news reports of the opening, there were many thousands of people who attended the official unveiling of that bridge. Like many thousands, which seems kind of unreal.
Well, there were quite a few people that that were there the day. I was going to say they dedicated, but I was a part of it, the Robert Kennedy Bridge on the end of Lower Broad Street as well. And people loved functions back in those days.
Yeah.
They didn't have their computers or television sets to look at, and some weren't too keen on looking at each other, so they would go to functions. And so parades were well attended. There were gala parades attended by so many people in communities, but downtown Plattsburgh was a busy, busy place. That's
Sure
why I'm
was.
thrilled and delighted to see that somebody's moved into the old Merkel's building, which was a
Yes.
fixture downtown, and people talk about Woolworths and Fishman's and
Yep.
and my friend Arnie's and all the other buildings, and now somebody else moving into a restaurant near him. So it goes. Here's another one that is of great interest to Calvin and me,
Yes.
because we had massive maneuvers
We did.
in this area more than one time, but this time 1939 was especially vital because it brought tens of thousands of people into this area who were a part of the maneuvers from Plattsburgh all the way up to Saranac, along the river and out in the fields. And, you know, we could tell many, many stories about it. And Calvin and I were lucky enough to find a book that was published right after the maneuvers were done. With how many pictures, Calvin? Hundreds?
Maybe 100.
It was published in Watertown, as I understand it, with great
Wow.
photographs. So that was, and we were able to find people who were around,
Yes.
Nap.
like Nap Light and his brother, who, you know, remembered it very well. And I have stories from my wife's father, who, you know, the housewives would make sandwiches and
Indeed.
pack lunches and oranges for the people who were out in the fields.
To say, everywhere I go and talk about those maneuvers, I find somebody who has firsthand knowledge of it. I was fortunate enough to speak at the Historical Association annual meeting, and I shared a story that a woman shared. She was growing up at the time, and these troops were in the fields next to her house, and she talked about, you know, just the crazy, the unreality of seeing troops, you know, doing mock battles in their cornfield or the fields that were marked keep out. But as I was telling this story, I found out one of the audience members, one of the boards of CCHA, actually grew up in the same area, and she remembered it too. It's amazing, but it was a huge event for this region. It was part of that longstanding Plattsburgh idea and the training camps that began in 1914 and 15 that 3 of Teddy Roosevelt's sons attended. I mean, that's that for history.
He was
right?
up here and gave a few speeches, and
Absolutely, but you know, it was like preparation so that ordinary citizens would be ready to serve in war as officers mostly. That led to this really huge event in 1939, where I think there were actually 40,000 participants.
yeah,
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
50 to 70. I know
Or
the
more.
numbers range.
or more. Yeah, I can't remember the total numbers we talked about, but they were specifically lined out in this book. If you haven't seen that book, you should watch the program that Calvin
Absolutely.
and I did, or scarf up a copy. Where the heck did we get that, Calvin?
I found it on eBay.
Oh, Calvin found. This
Nice.
is true. Calvin has such neat stuff that he's found on eBay. My goodness. I think I know what this is.
I'm sure you do.
Is there anybody from this area, and many visitors who have spent time in this area, doesn't know what Au Sable Chasm looks like? As a matter of fact, the double-ended boats were being used when I came here for a long time before they moved over to rafts. This is another location that's been affected. It was created by Mother Nature a long, long time ago, and it was distorted by Mother Nature a number of times through the years. And after a flood in the 40s, they said, you'll never have another flood that bad. Guess what? They even had to move to the other side of the road. So Calvin and I have been down there. We didn't get in the boats, though, did we? No, Calvin said, I'm staying on shore this time around. Isn't that wonderful?
Well, and Au Sable is one of those regions for us. You know, it's very important for Clinton County. Technically, of course, it sits in Essex County, so it's, I don't know, it's a little bit of a geographical difficulty for us to account for. But I think that we're just as proud of Au Sable Chasm in Clinton County as Essex County
gosh,
is.
Of course. Are you kidding me? I want to show one more from the maneuvers, because these show what the tanks looked like in 1939. And as I started to say, what person alive today who was a relatively small child when the maneuvers occurred wouldn't just love to go outside and see tanks going by?
Sure.
And hundreds of horses and horseback riders and so on. So it's just a huge part of our area, and this is the first Army maneuvers that took place over a long period of time. And somebody figured out on the backside of it, look at this little math problem on the back, probably the groceries for that day. Nowadays, you wouldn't buy a half a bag of groceries for that price, but maybe that's what it was all about. So, some of these are blank. I love the ones with personal messages.
I do too.
What a wonderful time we had with you last weekend. And okay, here's a good one.
Yes. Here we have an aerial view of Plattsburgh State. Center is the Kehoe Administration Building. So this image is probably from either the late 70s or early 80s, but much of the campus looks the same from an aerial view now.
I have to tell a very quick anecdote. I hope you don't mind. Not
Not at all.
anecdote, but anecdote. I had a friend who taught at the college, and they would bring the new students in from outside the area and bring them way up on the top floor of the Kehoe Administration Building as part of the indoctrination, if you will, when they first got there. And his first question to all the students every year was, see that beautiful lake out there? What's the name of that lake? And rarely would even one of the students know the name of the lake. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Uh-oh.
It's part of, there's a big text one that doesn't have any
Oh,
pictures.
there is.
And it's Ausable
People can't do-
Chasm. It's part of the postcard series.
Oh, I love it. You want to see a better picture of the people going down the river in the boat? A double-ended sloop, if you will. Double-ended boats were used a great deal in the Battle of Alcor, for example, and in other areas.
Sure.
So much of our history is bound up in things that have happened since the beginning of time, the wars, the Battle of Plattsburgh, the Battle of Valcour, the skirmishes in various places. Here we go. Something else that Calvin and I have talked about a great deal, and we all have.
Absolutely. So this is a picture of the Hotel Champlain, when it was the Hotel Champlain. It's another of those places that, depending on the era of the postcard, you can pick it up and it can say Hotel Champlain, or it can say Bellarmine College, or it can say Clinton Community College.
It also had a massive fire,
Yes, it did.
and like the phoenix rose from the ashes, and is one of the great stalwarts among all community colleges. And I'm sure you will agree with me in saying that we're delighted that Clinton Community College is a part of the North Country for a long time, and now we have arrangements with Plattsburgh State and with Potsdam and other, to transfer credits and so on and continue
Absolutely.
education after the 2 years. So it's a great blessing, and Calvin and I have spent some time up there as well.
It is. And it's an institution that also values history, which I appreciate.
Oh gosh, yes.
There's special collections, and their special collections, or their head librarian, Marianne Weigelhofer, whose name I hope I pronounced correctly, is very interested in the longer-standing history of the grounds and building, and along with Steve Fredericks has been collecting memorabilia from the Hotel Champlain to tie in that part of the history with the Clinton Community College part of the history.
It's wonderful. Steve, Calvin and I have spent time with Steve, and the phrase "I had a dream." Steve years ago saying, "Gordy, Calvin, I wish I could see that old house over there. I wish if I could ever get that house to turn that into an alumni house."
Yes.
Guess what? Isn't it neat to walk in there and
Yeah.
sit at the table and chat with Steve? And it's nice to see people with energy who are willing to do things. And so, great history. We're going to pause for just a moment, pick out a bunch of great postcards, and continue our program with Anastasia Pratt. For those people who just poured themselves a cold drink or a hot cup of coffee and sat down, you've missed a good portion of this show. We're talking with Dr. Stacy Pratt, the Clinton County historian and star of stage and screen and other venues which we haven't even discovered yet. But wearing her historian's cloak today, we're sitting here talking about postcards because she has published a new book. I put published in quotes because it won't be seen maybe until this program is aired on hometowncablenetwork.com, plattsburgh.com, or on the local cable systems in February of 2014. We're here doing this on December 11th, 2013. We want to let people get a little preview of what to accept so they can be so excited they'll put their money in their grubby little hands. We know how much the book is going to be sold for?
It's $21.95.
It is. It seems to be a relatively common price for similar books. So it's a book that includes many photographs, images of postcards.
Yes.
How old is the oldest?
Oh, that is a rough question. I would say probably around 1907.
Even though there were postcards around and some images in postcards in the North Country before that, it was 1907.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think that most of the images that are older didn't translate well to the digital media. Or if they transferred to digital media, they didn't transfer well to the printing demands of the publisher.
So you won't see the 1907 photograph of the 15th of Redford.
That's right. So disappointed.
Oh, but that's all right. Maybe we can figure out a way to get it in another book.
Yes.
So what we're doing is showing some of the photographs. Are all these photographs aren't in the book?
No,
So
no,
we're
it's a
showing
collection.
A collection of photographs around Clinton County. We've showed some of the highlights.
Yes.
And here's one that Calvin and me and Jim Millar and Stacy dearly love. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. This is Fort Montgomery and Rouse's Point. We actually have a couple of images of the fort in the book, some of the moat, for example. It's one of our northernmost points, and one of the things I tried to do with this book is make sure that we got every area. So actually, every municipality in the county is represented. We found at least one image from that place.
Did you really? That's just
And lots from
wonderful.
Rouse's Point. I have a special place in my heart for Rouse's Point, not least of which maybe because they have a Pratt Street, which is not so common and makes me smile.
Oh, of course.
But I think it's a neat place, and it's a neat place because it has a history, like with the Fort Montgomery, and a history of that international relationship with Canada, but also our relationship with Vermont.
Yeah, it's great. All right, here's another one. I love this.
I love this one too. This is Cumberland Head. And one of the things I love most about it is that wandering off in the left of that postcard are some cows. We tend to think of Cumberland Head as being, maybe a residential neighborhood or being a place where the state park is and the local beaches are, the Crate Center is to go for events. But it also was really prime farmland. And I think that's a pretty remarkable thing. And I really love the cows wandering at the water's edge.
Isn't that wonderful?
What year? Postmark.
It looks like it's hand tinted. This is not an original color photograph. The postmark is 1912.
Wow.
So, and I should mention something else about the history of postcards. Many of these early postcards were printed in Germany.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting? And somebody took the time to hand tint this postcard. I love to look at the penny stamps.
Oh, yes.
Because they were called
absolutely.
penny postcards, right? Somebody said the other day, how much does a stamp cost? I said, I don't know. I just bought 100 Christmas stamps for Christmas cards, and they cost me more than 3 cents. Because I grew up with 3-cent, first-class postage and penny postcards. So, and we're not going to sing a chorus of Penny Lane, just for those people who might be watching this program. Somebody said, what was your favorite Beatles song? Wow. What was your favorite Beatles song?
Probably Let It Be.
Really? It's a great song. But I'm just crazy enough to love Yellow Submarine.
Oh.
So here we go, Calvin. Maybe this looks familiar.
So now we're on Main Street in Champlain. This one I don't think has a date on it, but I imagine it must be, I don't think there are any cars in the picture, so probably in the early part of the century.
Early part of the 20th century. I have no idea, but yes, there is a car
Is
there.
there a car? Okay.
So I would say,
Oh, yeah.
I would have to say 1915 or before.
Looks like it's still a dirt road, but it's a neat vision of another active Main Street in the county.
As a matter of fact, I think our friend David Patrick had this image on one of his calendars. Does that look familiar? And the reason I mentioned that, there was a very locally famous photographer who took a lot of the early images that David Patrick has put on his, and almost every one of his images, he's got his car parked somewhere. Maybe he was as concerned as Miner was about his legacy, and he wanted
Maybe.
his own car.
Point of
that's
consistency.
beautiful. Oh, this is a neat one, and
It is a neat
isn't even
postcard.
that old in terms of the overall scheme of things.
On the back, it tells us it was printed in 1999. It's Saranac, and it's an anniversary of the town of Saranac. One thing that I was sort of disappointed in looking through the collections and getting postcards from other people is that we really didn't have a lot of images of Saranac. So I was delighted we had one to celebrate the town's 175th anniversary, and that we could see in that the rural heritage as well as the industrial heritage. But if people are finding images of Saranac and all of its villages and hamlets, please consider sharing them, because we don't have them, and the public library doesn't have images, and the Historical Association doesn't have images, and all of us would love to see more of that town.
All right, get them out of your dresser drawers or your
Yes.
sideboards, as my mother used to call them. Let us know. Calvin and I have been lucky enough in covering various North Country events for Hometown Cable over the years to have covered a lot of these celebrations, And so if your town or your little hamlet has a celebration and we haven't been there, get a hold of Calvin, and maybe we can. What do we have here?
Here we have the Witherell Hotel. I mentioned it earlier, so I
I
wanted
knew
to get
that.
a shot of the outside. The Witherell was a very, very popular hotel. It was located in downtown Plattsburgh, near City Hall Place. And it was just
Just
a
look out
place
the
to be.
windows upstairs in Arnie's and imagine what life was like before they built
Oh
the
my
bank,
gosh.
huh?
Yes,
Oh, and what a magnificent, wonderful.
absolutely.
And ask me where I was when the Cumberland Hotel burned.
Oh, where were you?
On the radio, parked
Covering
in
it.
front of it, broadcasting a blow-by-blow description.
Oh, wow.
And my viewers now, and it's long enough ago that I can mention candidly, that when I was divorced the first time, my wife, who was a musician, played at the Cumberland Hotel. And as part of the divorce, she got my 1917 upright Baldwin player piano that had been lovingly restored by the late Art Pierce, and 500 hand autographed rolls. And so I wasn't nearly as sad to see the Cumberland Hotel burn as I was to watch my piano go down through the floors and end up in the basement of the hotel.
Gosh.
That's a part of my interesting and colorful radio career, broadcasting that fire, which is now a parking lot. And we should mention to our viewers that there were great plans to build another, was it an underground parking garage or something that they were going to put there? Several plans over the years, none of which
No.
materialized. Okay, I don't have any clue.
Well, this is a rough image to see. I apologize for that. But it's Shazy Lake.
Really?
It is, and that's another postcard that I was really happy to manage to get into the book. The quality's not as great as it should be, but it's one of the few images we
little
have.
tiny letters. Okay,
Shazy
now I
Lake.
see it. Yes.
And I think that the reason we have this postcard is that Dick Lynch, who is the librarian for the Genealogical Society, also collects postcards, and he was kind enough to share his collection with us.
He has a collection that will astound.
Oh, it's amazing.
you.
I
Yes.
spent hours looking through,
What
just
a guy.
poring over every
I'm
single
glad you
line.
mentioned his name because, boy, has he been a stalwart in that group, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this is sort of a random picture, could be anywhere in the Adirondacks, in Essex or Clinton County, but it's one that highlights logging as one of our earliest industries, earliest career fields, and one that still continues, an important thing locally.
It certainly is, and I would urge all of our viewers, if you haven't had the opportunity of going to the Adirondack Museum in Blue Mountain Lake, please do so because they have displays of logging. And I had the good fortune to take my wife's father, the late Alfred Vaughn, there before he died, way back when, he and his wife, Leona. But he was involved in the logging, and I didn't need anybody to interpret any of the equipment, any of the signs, because he gave me a running commentary as we walked through, and I was absolutely thrilled, especially when we sat in a little room and they had a rotating display of photographs of the logging days, and here he was. Oh, I knew that guy. Oh, yeah, I knew him.
What an amazing experience.
Oh, my goodness.
It's a beautiful museum,
It's wonderful.
but what an amazing experience.
It's the best museum of its kind on earth. There aren't very many like that. I mean,
It's
we
true.
have some great museums here, including the one in Tupper Lake. But the Adirondack Museum is just fabulous. Okay. Oh, yeah, this is one that Calvin will recognize.
So we have a church, and I think it's the Roman Catholic Church from Moors.
Moors.
And actually, there are a significant number of postcards of Moors and Moors Forks, which is interesting. Not so many of Saranac, but I think we have maybe 30 postcards of various buildings and places in Moors.
Look at this.
This one is the Hotel Adirondack, or the Adirondack Hotel. It's a hotel in Dannemora that had a varied history.
Where Ting's parking lot is today. I love it. That's written on the postcard.
It went through several owners over the years. At the time of this photograph, J.S. Meter and Sons owned it. The Meters also owned a general store. They were quite the business people.
And it burned in 1922. You could do a whole book on the tragic fires
Oh,
in
indeed.
the North Country because, in the old days when you didn't have the modern firefighting equipment and every structure was made, most structures were made out of wood. Whole time downtown Plattsburgh was burned down in a couple of fires,
Yeah, it really was. And people were wise enough to take photographs, so we actually have photographs of those ruins, too, throughout the county.
Oh, yeah, lots of them.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one that's a classic.
Yes, and another Dannemora image.
How many events have I attended in that wonderful edifice over the years? Yeah, Dannemora.
There are a lot of postcard images of Dannemora, in large part because of the prison.
Well, here we go.
And
Here's one right here.
Here's one, and I think this was the new hospital ward.
Yep.
Okay, so this was soon after the hospital ward was built. It, of course, is not the current hospital ward. There's a newer state-of-the-art hospital facility at the correctional facility. But this, at the time, was the state-of-the-art hospital ward for the prison, which has, since its creation, been the third largest maximum security prison in New York State.
Thanks to several close friends of ours, past and present, we've been able to chronicle a lot of the history of Dannemora, Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora through its various iterations, there's your word,
Exactly.
over the years. And, the Gilroy brothers, for example, Terry Gilroy and his brother. Terry, we've spent time in his living room.
And I would say many of the images we have of Dannemora, not just postcards, but books about Dannemora and postcards, actually came from the Gilroys. They were donated to this office
Just
long before I
wonderful
came.
people and wonderful friends. And once again, Calvin and I are blessed to have met them and to be able to capture this while Terry was still alive. And most recently, my dear friend Peter Light, who was on my doorstep the other night to chat, who, through dint of his own blood, sweat, and tears, has a nice little museum
It is wonderful.
right next door to the Genealogical
It
Society
is. And I
the old school on
I would say if you haven't been, you should go see
Please, yeah.
Pete's museum. It's a small space, but he has such an amazing collection of images and artifacts. He changes the collection 4 times a year. So
Think about
anytime you go, you can likely see a new set of images.
Yeah.
And it's really a cool place.
Museums are cool places.
They are.
And when my kids were all small and my grandchildren, where did we spend time in the summer? At the Smithsonian. How to see a part of our nation's history, and only a tiny portion of the objects they have are displayed at any given time. I mean, every museum has rotating displays, but the Smithsonian has millions and millions and millions of objects and items. Oh my goodness, look at this.
I like this one, I have to admit. It's a place called the Elmhurst Inn. It was in Plattsburgh, and it was just a little country inn where you could get a room, but apparently you could also get like the best chicken dinners. Every piece of information I found about this inn called attention to their fried chicken dinners.
What is there about houses with porches? I love porches.
Welcoming and
Oh,
comforting.
just wonderful. With the rocking chairs. Okay, here we go. This is something else that Calvin and I have spent a lot of time talking about, thanks to our good friend Roger Black and others.
Yes,
He's put together a nice little slideshow, hasn't he?
he has indeed.
And this is something that younger people who may be transplants have no idea that this place even existed. The Catholic Summer School in Cliff Haven. It thrived for a long, long time, and we've seen that image before. I mean, when I say thrived, it thrived. It was a busy place.
It really was. Sitting on a piece of land that the D&H Railroad donated to this school, which was part of the Catholic Chautauqua movement, to educate. So people came up in the summertime, different parishes built buildings, and the folks who came went to classes and had fun, went to parties, concerts, but really came here to learn.
And some of the buildings still existed when I came to work on construction building the air base in the early 1950s. And now, oh my goodness, look at this. Talk about iterations of Wilcox Dock, right?
Indeed.
Is this familiar to people? Wilcox Dock off Cumberland Avenue in Plattsburgh. You know, we can remember it all grown over and doing interviews there. And how many times have Calvin and I been down there to see reconstructed boats from Lake Champlain Canal boats and who knows what all there. What a great, oh, that's great.
Isn't it neat? And this postcard has a postmark of 1908, so the image is from before that, and it's neat. I think that somewhere in this collection we also have an image from the 1980s of Wilcox Dock, and it is a very different place and yet the same.
Some of our viewers may not be familiar with the fact that we had a trolley system here in the North Country for a long, long time, and the trolley tracks were still under the tarmac, as they call it, when I first came here.
Absolutely.
I have a spike that came out of the tracks
Neat.
in my garage, one of the great treasures. And in my pocket right now are two of the trolley tokens.
Oh, wow.
From the Plattsburgh Traction Company, then the Plattsburgh Bus Company after that closed.
Isn't that
So,
amazing?
yeah, they all make memories, and that's what downtown Plattsburgh looked like way back when. Well, our program would never be complete unless we showed a picture of this wonderful historic building called the Kent Lord House.
Yes. Another great museum, a great place for kids to visit, certainly a staple of field trips. And in these economic times when field trips are not quite so easy, it's also a museum that has traveling exhibits, things that they will loan out to a classroom teacher or to a school to bring part of the Kent Lord House to the school itself. But also a place that figured heavily into our local history, our local peacetime history and our local wartime history. As it was certainly used as housing by British officers during the War of 1812 and the Battle of Plattsburgh, and as such figures heavily in the Battle of Plattsburgh Commemoration Week.
And on and on. I've told ghost stories there many times.
Yes.
One of my wife's ancestors helped to build the Kent Lord House.
Neat.
His name was Benjamin Vaughn, Vaughan. And we've been there so many times. The first docent there, when I started my radio career in 1961, was a man by the name of L. Newton Hayes. A brilliant man who was born and brought up in China. And you talk about being mesmerized by history. He would go in there and he would close his eyes like the late Clinton County historian Addie Shields, who would stand in a field with you and take you back in time. And you had to live there sometimes for an hour and a half until she'd come out of her reverie. But L. Newton Hayes was the same way. And so I was indoctrinated to the history of the Kent Lord House in ways that people might never be in the future. But just to go there, especially at Christmas time. We're doing this just before Christmas 2013. They always have great celebrations there at
Yes,
Christmas
they do.
time. I like this one, too. Oh, this is a really neat shot. Where is it?
It's Officers Row on what used to be the Air Force Base. It's now part of a protected area. That whole part of the former base is on the National Historic Registry, protected buildings as historic sites. But it's a really neat shot because you can see the cannons. So this was one of the earliest moments of the barracks as a military facility.
This is what we affectionately call the old base oval.
Yes.
This flagpole is no longer there, but there is an historic marker and a little stubby flagpole there,
Yes.
so you can stop by and take a look at it and see what it is. Soldiers from the Battle of Plattsburgh were buried there, and their bones were dug up when they turned this into a parade ground and were moved into the Old Base Cemetery, which is, if you're interested in cemeteries as we are, just take a walk through there and see. We have
Oh,
a Congressional
absolutely.
Medal of Honor winner buried there, and so on. Oh, here's another
Yes.
building.
It's now the Vilas home. It's had various names over the years, including at one point, I think it was the SF Vilas home for friendless
Oh, yeah.
and destitute
They
women.
used-
Or it
They
was-
use that phrase, home for the friendless.
Yes.
And it bothers me every time I hear that, because
no.
I knew about some of the things that went on in the children's homes and homes for the friendless. Vilas was a powerful person in this community. His own private home was quite beautiful. The Vilas home was located along Cornelia Street, and it looks far different now because they did a beautiful addition to it some years back, and they maintained the architectural integrity.
It's an absolutely beautiful addition. Something I did want to say about the Vilas home, it's sort of a familiar sight for local folk because you drive by it, and I think most of us know someone who has been there, including Addie Shields. Addie Shields
Oh,
did
yes.
live there, and she did a history of the Vilas home while she was there. But there's often a misconception that Samuel Vilas is the one who opened this house, and actually his wife is the person who opened this home for women. She did it in her husband's honor after he died, but she's the one who formed this entity. And also it's important to note, I think, that the Vilas home is currently celebrating its 125th anniversary.
Wonderful people over there, wonderful apartments. I've had the occasion to go there many times. I know a number of people, prominent names in our community, who reside there now. So it's one of many such places in our community, and we're delighted to have them here forever and ever.
Absolutely.
And it's so opportune that you should pick this as the last image of the day, because it's an aerial view.
It's an aerial view of Plattsburgh. It's an aerial view of Plattsburgh from before the construction of Plattsburgh State University. So instead of seeing Plattsburgh State, as we saw a few minutes ago in an aerial shot, we actually see the city as it was before that, when there were houses in the places where we now know college buildings.
There are people watching this who are old enough to bemoan the fact that some of those wonderful old buildings are gone. And many of the old buildings that remain were turned into student housing, and we needn't get into that aspect of it. But, time changes things.
It sure does.
And that's a wonderful view on which to end this program. The book that Stacy has put together is called Clinton County,
Yes. Part of the
And-
Postcard History series.
part of the Postcard History series. It will be available probably in your local stores.
It should be. February 3rd is the official date of publication, and on February 3rd it should be available. I know already it will be available at the Clinton County Historical Association.
Well, of course it will be.
And I'm assuming that it will be in other places as well. It is always available at local drugstores. And also, Sam's Club has been very kind and has been selling books from this series as well.
Oh, that's great. I just before we end this wonderful interview with Stacy Pratt, I want to say that we're fortunate enough to now have 3 museums on the former Plattsburgh Air
Yes.
Force Base. Not only the Clinton County Historical Association Museum, but a transportation museum and the Battle of Plattsburgh Association
Yes.
Museum, and soon to be another museum from them across the road as they open what used to be the original interpretive center into a Plattsburgh Air Force Base Museum.
Yes.
So we're fortunate. This is something that I could only dream about when I first moved here, because I felt strongly about history the first time I set foot in this community. And hopefully, thanks to Calvin and Hometown Cable, people like you and your mom and dad and others who really care about, and Bob Cheeseman and all the other historians in the
Yes.
county, that thrill to learn about the history will be expanded and perpetuated. Now, if people have questions connected with your book, with the postcards, with the history of Clinton County in any way, how can they contact you, Stacy?
A few ways. First, you can come to this office at the Government Center. We're right next door to the Board of Elections.
Tuesdays
And Thursdays from 9 to 5. Although I will make special appointments if you
Of
can't make
course
it at
you
those
will.
times. You can call us at 565-4749. That will call this office.
That's a 518 prefix.
It is definitely. So if you need special arrangements, you can call and we'll make them. Or you can email. And the email it's a long email. I check the email every day, so you can reach me not just on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but it's pratta@co.clinton.ny.us. So pratta@co.clinton.ny.us.
What, do you have any other big plans in the offing that we haven't covered today? I know we've covered a lot of ground in the last hour and a half, but
No huge projects at the moment, although I am fortunate. I've been working on a history column for a little local publication.
wonderful.
And we'll continue to do that, and then hopefully, start work on another book-type project that maybe this time will let color be involved. That'd be nice.
Wow, that's exciting. Stacy, thanks
Yeah.
so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our viewers for watching this program, for commenting, for thanking us for what we do. Calvin has been doing this, as I said, since the early 1980s, myself since 1997, and the only way we can continue doing this, hopefully far into the future, is if some of our viewers, whether they run a commercial establishment or are private citizens who enjoy what we do, get out the checkbook. Write a generous check, a small amount or as large amount as you can, to make sure this program continues into the future. And address it to Hometown Cable. Send it to Hometown Cable in care of Calvin Castine, 1477 Ridge Road in Champlain. We thank you for all of your comments and suggestions. And who knows where we're going.